So let's start with you. You are Assistant Principal at the Department of Rural and Community. So can you give us an update on the first social enterprise policy? Siobhan had mentioned in the first panel. 3 priorities. It was published in 2019 and focused on raising awareness, building support and development of the space, and policy alignment with other departments. So where are we and where are we going?
Yeah, certainly. And just before I start, that was an excellent presentation that Karen gave there. It really just showed the work that she's done, but it also showed the challenges that are out there, not just for Karen's great social enterprise, but just for the sector in general. And that's what we're trying to address with social enterprise policy. So just back to your question, in 2019 we published Ireland's first social enterprise policy. Like social enterprise have been around a long time before 2019, some say over 100 years. But there was no kind of recognition of the sector. The 3 main challenges were awareness raising. A lot of people are not aware of social enterprise, and that includes people sometimes in social enterprises themselves not being aware of it. But also, and probably more important as well, across government departments, not appreciating the impact, the potential of social enterprise. So we have made some progress there with awareness raising initiative to get the word out. And I saw one of your questions there was, should a national campaign be done, an advertising campaign?
Yeah.
There have been some on a more local level under Arise. I know in Kildare there was one done, and there's definitely going to be more of them in the future. The second major objective was in supporting the growth of social enterprise, and that's down to funding, of course, and as always, there's never enough funding for the sector. But we try to get, like our own department support social enterprise in a number of different ways, through SICAP, through Leader, through our own dormant accounts funding, but also other departments like the LEOs, Enterprise Ireland. They're already supporting social enterprise. There's some good stories out there, but there's a lot of difficulty with social enterprises accessing those supports, and we have made some progress there in the last policy, and we hope to do more with the next one. The final major objective was policy alignment, and this touches on, I suppose we're talking about childcare just there. Earlier on we were talking about the criminal justice sector, but there's also other areas like this climate action. That's one of the main government priorities at the moment, and social enterprise is operating in all of those areas. So it's important that those departments and the people in those are supported, and that social enterprise is ready to make a contribution. We have speakers here today that will talk about what social enterprise is doing in climate action and other areas too. So just very briefly, an update on where we are with developing the new policy. We are planning to publish our new policy later on this year, October, November. We now have a draft policy. We've actually completed a engagement process. We had 6 workshops across Ireland where we basically asked 2 questions. What are the opportunities out there, and what are the challenges facing social enterprise, and how could a new policy address those? So we've got, as you can imagine, we've got a lot of responses back, and that's feeding into our development of the new policy. But also we've worked with the OECD on doing a review of social enterprise in Ireland, on how we've implemented and supported the sector, how we've implemented the policy. And that report is coming out in summer, I'd say about June or July. That will be important in feeding into the new policy, focus our minds. We'll give that very serious consideration when we finalise our own the new policy. There will also be another opportunity for everybody to contribute as well. We'll publish, hopefully over the summer, we will publish a draft social enterprise policy as part of a public consultation, and that will give everybody a chance to have a look at it and make further observations or suggestions on developing that policy. So I think that's basically where we are with the first policy, and an update on how we're developing the second.
So, Richard, in essence, social enterprise companies, even some of them themselves aren't aware necessarily of the environment in which they inhabit. There's never enough funding. The Leo and Enterprise Ireland, there is some difficulty in accessing there, particularly Karen pointed that out. Social enterprise spans childcare, justice, climate. We're expecting a new policy in October, November, and the OECD report is coming out in the summer. So John, as CEO of Partas, could you give us an insight into how social enterprise fits into an overall economic vista? And we heard there that the OECD report is going to be out in the summer. What about looking at this from a European lens as well?
Sure. Well, I'm, apart from being CEO of Partas, I'm on board of SERI, but I'm also on the expert advisory group at the European Commission, which Richard is also. Yeah. So the 2 of us are there flying the Irish flag. kind of listening to and contributing to that big picture. Sometimes it's kind of difficult when you're working away at the coalface, as everybody here is, chipping away, trying to do your bit, to see the bigger trends, what's actually happening. Actually, at that level, I believe there's a very positive picture of the trends. Now, we see kind of the delivery and all of those trends, but I just took note of some of the things that are happening at this point in time. We're a year and a quarter into the action plan for social economy from the European Commission. That was the beginning of a whole series of actions that will take place and that are taking place at this point in time. They had three kind of objectives under the action plan. Creating the framework conditions right across the EU for social economy to thrive, opening up opportunities for capacity building, and recognition of the social economy and its potential. And I think the recognition of the social economy and its potential is the one which I can see a real trend happening more broadly. The other things are actions that will happen. They're happening from the very first of those. The whole EU, the Council, will issue a recommendation in a few months' time. They've been taking the feedback in. So this is a recommendation to effectively recognise the value of the social economy. I just see what to say. So they say, setting up, this is a recommendation to national governments, which doesn't happen too often from the EU, that we kind of pass down strong recommendations as to what needs to happen. So they're saying, support social enterprise for setting up single entry points in national administrations on areas such as employment policy, state aid. There's a whole look into state aid for this sector. Public procurement, where there's a huge amount of happening in terms of taxation, research, education, skills and training. There's the Pact for Skills, which is part of the action plan, and financial and non-financial support. That has trickled down, so that's at kind of supranational level, the EU. The Committee of the Regions then, who kind of feed through to regional and local authority level, have also issued an opinion basically supporting that all the way through and advising regional and local authorities that they should be taking actions as well to support all of this. There's last month the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution, and it says there, promoting social and solidarity economy for sustainable development. They're saying why? Because it promotes democracy, social justice, and contributes to the achievement and localization of the Sustainable Development Goals. And that's followed up then with the International Labour Organization acknowledging the role social enterprise can play in reducing inequalities, spreading prosperity, opportunity, and sustainability. To put all that into one kind of little package, what I believe we are part of is an alternative economic model. We know, everybody knows, the current economic model is not working. It's not serving people or planet too well. The resources of the planet are being grabbed by too few, and the fruits of those resources are not being shared equally. It's contributing to climate change, biodiversity, inequality, more poverty in the world. So we really do need an alternative. We're not part of some little left-wing kind of crackpot group. We're part of a genuine alternative model. And to go back to the previous panel, and John Lonergan and Joyce as well, we really need to find our voice within that understanding of ourselves. That is the sector we're part of. And that is the sector that there's a huge amount of push behind, and that's what we should be pushing for now.
Okay, so thank you for bringing us around the world and via the UN, the European Commission, and the Labour Organisation as well. And if we could move from that macro picture, Una Lavelle, and General Manager of Recycling, can I ask you the question that Richard asked over those different meetings? What are the challenges facing the sector? We will get onto the opportunities, but just the challenges from your perspective as a practitioner.
Thanks, Susan. Before that, can I actually say a big thank you to Aileen O'Donoghue, without whom I wouldn't be sitting here today. 24 years ago, I was living at home, I had two young kids, and at home living in Clondalkin, and this circular came through the door which had the A to Z of environmental, how you can help your environment. And that was 24 years ago, before anyone was talking about circular economy, and that was from the local Clondalkin partnership, of which Aileen was the boss at the time. And through that, in my back pocket was a dusty degree in environmental science. And I said, sure, well, maybe I could be, I could be of some use there. And I think she moved mountains because there was quite a rigorous process in getting onto a working group at the time, and she moved mountains to involve me. And the next thing, I was on the board of the community centre. I was involved in writing a business plan for what's now Recycle It. And 24 years later, I'm here speaking at a conference. So thank you, Aileen. Some days I don't thank you, but and she has been very encouraging always. So she has always had that presence of mind to foster social enterprise. It was, I'd say, one of the first partnerships in the country that had a social enterprise development officer, and that had such huge commitment to fostering social enterprise. So it's no surprise that now Oakfield Trust are actually engaging so much more fully in the space. Also, we are the beneficiaries of Oakfield Trust because we had no lease. When we started 21 years ago, we were a non-entity effectively. We were a company, we didn't know what we were at the time. And they stepped in, couldn't get a rent, and they took the rent and sublet it to us. So they took the risk and on us and absorbed that, and we have that relationship ever since. So that's a huge part. I mean, that can't be understated, the importance of having that intermediary between the social enterprise and private, space, and that they're not willing to take a risk. So you have to have some intermediary there who's willing to take that risk, because the social enterprise is a fledgling, hasn't the capacity, doesn't know if it's worth taking a risk on. So that's so important to have the vision there to be that intermediary, and I can see Oakfield Trust are broadening out that scope now. So to go back to your question,
well, I think first of all, we'll give that a round of applause.
The challenges, I always bring it back down to basics, and the biggest challenges that social enterprise on the ground are facing at the minute is insurance. When I would say 10 years ago, we had a combined insurance bill, so we're talking about fleet insurance, public liability, and maybe a little bit of building insurance, of 1,900. Today it tops 50,000.
So 5-0.
5-0. So that effectively displaces, unfortunately, 2 jobs. So what you find in some social enterprises is that real jobs are becoming displaced through the cost of living and the cost of insurance. We had an ESB bill 2 years ago, 1,900, last year was 8,000. We got, I think, maybe 1,200 back in the scheme to help businesses, but like bridging those gaps. So we're like the swan, we're all very serene on top, but it is manic, underneath, and the stress and anxiety that's within social enterprises just to keep the doors open for those costs that all enterprises are experiencing. But it's very, very real in the social enterprise space, that the impact of insurance is huge. This next thing is capacity within organisations to grow. You're struggling with increased governance, increased legislation, obligations, and we, for example, a couple of years ago, well, maybe 5 or 10 years, we would have taken transitional students, because engaging in the child protection legislation, we said no. And we really regretted it. When we said we have so much legislation that we're dealing with, which is waste management, governance, etc., that we couldn't be adding to that huge burden of management of regulations, which was the child protection. So we said, no, you have to be over 18 if we're giving work experience to somebody now, which is a huge pity. And then the other issue is boards. Is having directors, having good directors who will engage. We've noticed, because I'm also involved in CRN now, which is the Community Resources Network of Ireland, and there's 48 members. And we have noticed that it's becoming more and more challenging to get directors on board. Every director on our boards is a voluntary director. There's no reimbursement. There's no accounting for the amount of time that those directors, and I'm sure Lorraine will be well able to speak about the amount of time that directors put in to boards, that because they're so invested. Like, you've really passionate people, but finding those passionate people who are willing to and have the time to engage as required, because there's such a governance burden on social enterprises, as well as the enterprise, the needs of the enterprise, never mind the needs of it being run as a charity or a social enterprise, and finding directors that are willing to come on board and sign up and even just get involved in the banking. There's huge burden to keep those directors involved and to get them in the first place and hold on to them. So it's that I think is going to be a huge issue into the future in terms of social enterprise, keeping social enterprises afloat.
Donal, Una has laid out everything there pretty clearly for us. I mean, there's three key issues. There's cost, there's growing capacity in an organisation, and there's engagement with the board directors that you're specifically looking for. So we've heard from three people now, and what do you think the sector needs to develop? Now that we've heard the challenges, we've heard the overall where it's going, and we've heard the policy. Looking forward, what does it need to develop?
I wouldn't be placing the kind of focus of blame on government or anything like that at all. If it comes across like that, that's not what's meant. But to cover Una's point about the insurance, we do need a state-sponsored insurance programme for the sector. It's not fair that it's kind of at the vagaries of the private commercial space. In terms of the energy cost, then there should be a strong focus placed on kitting out community infrastructure with energy cost saving measures. And I mean, I believe that the infrastructure is there to do that. We just need to focus a bit more on it. So there are two major areas that we need to do. In terms of new social enterprises and the ideas behind that, I think we need to go back to brass tacks, stuff that would have been done 20, 30 years ago in terms of local community audits to prioritise what the local social innovations need to be or are. Because, from time to time, it's very rare that you come across a Karen Leigh that such a social enterprise develops out of one private family member's concern, right? It is rare in the extreme. And more often than not, other strong social enterprises are developed out of a need across a community of interest, which can have brought a longer and truer journey. But oftentimes when we go back, maybe 20, 30 years ago, in halls like this, you'd have everybody developing a wish list as to what it was that they wanted to do for their local area. And from that, some of the stronger social enterprises have developed. And that's real community buy-in, rather than concentration risk on one person or a couple of people to deliver something that is going to be a benefit to so many other people then down the line. So there's that problem. People mentioned about social impact earlier on. We need to get a standard recognised measure of social impact for this space. I've only started looking at it. We've conducted a social impact report in terms of the work that we've done, probably for the first time ever in about 20 years, to be quite honest. But during the course of that experience, we found at least 4 different methods of social impact reporting. And it's going to be so important for this sector to get that right and to have something standard that everybody can hang their hat on and say, you compare apples with apples. Why? Because I believe the future for the finance position in social enterprise space is going to be within philanthropy. That's what it's going to be. Karen has made the point earlier that social finance loans are capped at about 600, probably go to 700 or 800,000 at this stage now. But still, if Karen comes in looking for 2 million, or 3 million, or 5 million euro, social finance providers aren't going to do that. We would have thought as social finance providers that the banks will be at that stage. We've dealt with Karen in the past. We've dealt with other large-scale social enterprises like GAY, etc. when they were starting out. And we've incubated them to a stage where we would have expected that the banks would be able to turn around and say, okay, you've developed a credit record, you've proved your work, you've earned your stripes, now we'll take you on board. Now that doesn't seem to be the case, so you need to go back to the drawing board. And it's very interesting, it's in this room back in 2018 that Deirdre Martell and Rethink put a challenge down that we weren't doing enough for startup social enterprises. And we'll talk about that later on. But maybe Karen has mentioned a day. Maybe that's going to be the spur us on to the next piece of research. So how do we get that 2, 3, 4, 5 million euro finance facility in place for social enterprise like that in the future. In terms of awareness raising, nationwide, you all know very well aware of nationwide, some of our clients are found on nationwide. You know, we need a standard nationwide for social enterprise by the state broadcaster. You know, that kids coming home from school can relate to, that people on the street can relate to, that they understand it. I mean, nationwide is great for what it does, but I'd love to see a social enterprise nationwide. I suppose that's probably where I'd stop right now, because I could go on and on and on, but I'm conscious of time.
We know. So if I could, I just maybe, Karen, I'll go back to you before I go to Lorraine on this. And you spoke about the lesser discussed areas there, the exit strategy, if your turnover is over a certain amount and excludes you in one way, your success becomes a limiting factor then in that regard. So those lesser discussed elements, where is the forum for those to be taken from here and to be discussed further?
I don't know, I think people maybe don't talk about it, and it's something that you probably don't even think about it, because probably when you're a person, when you're a social entrepreneur setting out on your journey, it's all about the mission, nothing's going to stop you. You probably don't think about what you're going to do when you want to retire. So nobody ever actually sat me down and said, what is your exit strategy? And it's something that has only come to my consciousness in the last month or two, when we were given an acquisition opportunity to purchase a company very similar to ours, but is not a social enterprise and not a charity. So somebody very similar to me set up an organisation 18 years ago, very similar business, has run it as a for-profit organisation, is now retiring and is looking for a large sum on people to buy it, and we're asked to buy it. And it just occurred to me, so there is this person sailing off into the sunset, selling her multi-million euro company for a very hefty fee. I'm thinking, what am I doing? Where am I going? I haven't thought about the future. What when I retire? I'm not retiring today or tomorrow, but like, what am I going to do? I need to start planning for the future. And it just struck me. I don't want it to come across in the wrong way, because we all do it for the rewards that we get and for knowing that we make a difference, and that is huge. And I think you can't buy that. But we also need to be able to plan for our future. We need to be able to have money to retire. You know, so it really just struck me. It was just so black and white, and it actually upset me for a little while to think, there's this person, the two of us in very similar situations, we took two completely different paths, and where are we ending up? You know, so we both helped children, we both have, you know, but what's in it? And the difference, like, is when you're talking monetary, financial terms, is a lot of money. And what could you have had, and what have you given up? I think people don't talk about that. Maybe they don't think about it. Maybe it's just something that occurred to me through that acquisition opportunity that we were offered. But it's something that didn't really sit well with me for a long time, because I think that, you know, when you're starting out, you will work for free, you will take very little salary, you will often pay people more than you pay yourself because you can't afford to. And I'm just wondering, 15 years in, reflecting back, is that equitable? Is that fair? Is that where we want the sector to be? How are you going to encourage people into that sector if that's what they have to do? And they will do it because they're very passionate and they're very driven, and sometimes maybe a bit just running headlong into it without really thinking about it. But really, I think, and you talk about burnout and all of those things, and I have seen it with other people in similar situations. You're supposed to, this becomes your lifestyle, and you give up so much for it. In the same way as other for-profit entrepreneurs will, like, you do everything to make it work. But I just think that maybe there needs to be a little bit more conversation around fairness and being able to encourage people into the sector, to give them, like, I always say profit is not a dirty word, because you need profits to reinvest into your company. I go back to my values. I don't want to become a millionaire out of this, don't get me wrong, but I think you need to be able to make a fair living and not sacrifice your family, sacrifice what you have to do to make it work.
If I could then, Lorraine, if I could, we've gone from that overall macro point of view. We've heard from like two very clear practitioners, Donal then being a supplier, I suppose, into the area. If we could come back into that macro environment, and just, you're director of SERI, so what is the data saying? We haven't got a chance to have gotten to that yet. What's the data saying about the state of play in Ireland, and what can we learn from other countries?
Yeah, and with data is a funny one actually, because tomorrow we will have data on the sector, which is incredibly exciting. We don't have data actually, and we haven't up to now. And it is actually a little bit mind-boggling to think that as a sector we've got this far without any data. Because can you imagine in a commercial environment, anyone going in to pitch for funding, to pitch for investment, and somebody saying, well, you know, how big is the opportunity? Well, I'm not sure, you know, what activities are you involved in? Well, I can kind of tell you some of them, and not have that evidence. So we actually looked to Scotland, and you guys have really, you know, have a brilliant path there in terms of the census that you've done over the years. And we spoke to the guys who ran that programme, and we obviously would have lobbied government really hard, and it was in the last policy, which goes to show if it's in policy and it can be measured, it can get delivered, which is fantastic. And a tender was put out for the sector to respond. And again, tying all of this together, there was a social clause in that tender, so SERI was one of the consortium members because that social clause existed. So it meant that the sector was heavily involved in gathering the data on what the sector is about. And that's really important too. So over the course of last year, there was a mammoth exercise undertaken to try and understand how many social enterprises are there in Ireland, what activities are they involved in, where are they based, and then to try and have some sort of metrics around income and employment. What happened there, and I think it's important to note this, is a lot of the start of that project was spent talking to stakeholders and people in the sector to try and understand the best methodology. When the data lands tomorrow, and it's incredible that we've got to there, it will absolutely spark lots of debates. And that's a really good thing. And we as a sector need to embrace that and work together on that. Because people are going to look at some of that data and go, why is that in there? You know, why is that metric saying this? You know, hang on a second, you've left this out. So all of those things need to really be discussed because we need to understand it more. There's a lot of grey area. You don't want to make it too black and white, but there's a lot of grey area, and we sometimes don't help ourselves with that. And I think we need to have a collective conversation around the data. The other thing that the data will do is it'll start to give a little bit of a measure on, you know, for example, what do income levels look like? You know, what is social enterprise activity maybe by county? What does it look like? And we should start to interrogate that as a sector to understand what are the successes and why? What can we learn from that? What sectors are we in? Are we skewed in particular ways? Is, you know, light and oxygen not getting to certain areas? So I think unless we really leverage that data and bring it to every conversation and also improve it, and there's a government commitment that this won't be the first exercise that will be repeated, not necessarily in the format that it was done, because I think we need to improve on it. But if we don't own that, you know, that is a real missed opportunity. But we also need to use that data and bring it into the conversations, you know, with the corporates, with the philanthropists, you know, in the supply chains, you know, all of the different areas, into every single government department. So in fairness, the guys, you know, having cross-government discussions, they're going into government departments and been asked, you know, by the likes of, you know, Enterprise, who measure everything up, down and sideways. So tell me, what's the size of the sector? And they haven't been able to say it either. So we need to be able to use that data.
Richard, I'm guessing you know what's going to be released tomorrow. And basically smiling your face, I'm guessing I'm correct. And so, with that knowledge in mind, of course, that I know you can't get into detail with us on, but I asked the question of Donal, what needs to be done to develop the sector. The question I have for you is, what are the opportunities for the sector to develop?
Yeah, look, we're well aware there's plenty challenges out there. But as I said earlier, we asked the question when we went around to our various workshops around the country. And some of the common opportunities out there, one of them was young people, getting more young people involved in social enterprise. There's a strong appetite for young people in the whole this whole area. We were very lucky to do a collaboration with Feroiga as part of their entrepreneurship program. We actually designed a module on social enterprise in that, and there's 6,000 students every year doing social enterprise projects. They actually had their awards, actually I think it's this day last week, up in the Richmond Barracks. And some of the new social enterprise that the students in transition year are designing are great to see, and it's very encouraging. But definitely young people, there's an appetite out there. I think you'll see in our new policy hopefully an increased focus on young people, more young people involved in social enterprise. Just moving on to another opportunity, and Donal mentioned it there, the whole area of finance and funding. And look, there's no easy answers to that. Even though it's in the news today, I think there's 8 billion or something that has to be a decision made about. Maybe some of that could come our way. But in relation to funding organisations, the credit union movement have shown a big appetite to get involved in supporting local community and social enterprise projects in recent years. We actually had a meeting with them there a couple of months ago. I think there's definitely going to be more opportunities there for large-scale or upscaling projects and funding from the credit union movement. So I definitely think that's an opportunity that we hope to realise over the next few years.
So young people and the credit union movement, and I suppose the question, and I'm going to put this to John, is, if I could flip the title of this panel, the title of the panel is Developing the Space, but John, is the space developing us?
Yeah, I had a little bit of angst when Gareth gave me that title, and I thought, developing the space. Well, what's that mean? In a way, not to be too critical, but it was a bit relevant 20 years ago when we were talking about developing community businesses, and then we were developing into this thing called the social economy that was starting to appear. We weren't quite sure what it was, and we were all the time coming from behind, developing into sector or social enterprise. I think was. I remember Karen. We met 12 years ago or something. We were catching the wave for social enterprise. And that was an integrated project to find out, did social entrepreneurship exist in Ireland? And actually, we found Karen. And we found out. I'd say she's one, all right, actually. And there are plenty of them. We're a nation rich in social entrepreneurs, really rich. And in community businesses and in social economy approaches. We're fertile ground. So is the space developing us, or are we developing space? Bearing in mind what I said before, the broader ecosystem around us is entirely supportive. So we need to kind of have an understanding that this is a moving target. It's moving, whether we're moving with it or not, it's moving. So we have to keep up with it. We have to, if anything, like when you're surfing that wave, you have to be kind of a bit ahead of it, be where it's going to be. And where is it going to be? Well, we know, for instance, again, from a European point of view, there are some countries where it's 10 to 12% of the current economy.
GDP,
yeah. So we can guess that it will be less than that when figures come out tomorrow in Ireland. But there's a target for us. So that the potential for us is to grow. I think the EU target is to be 10% right across the member states. So that will be a challenge for the vast majority of countries. So how do we? I think we've got to realise that we are part of an alternative economic model. We can do it leaner, we can do it better, we can do it greener, we can do it fairer than anybody out there. We've got to be convinced of that ourselves and take that passion for the sector as much as what it is we're doing in the sector. And take that passion and be loud about it and demand our space. And in that respect, that's how we develop the space.
So Una, if we weren't to get to the space of where social enterprise is 10% of GDP, like what practical things needs to change?
Well, practically, what we would love to see change is an interim body, like I said, like Oakfield Trust became the interim body between the people who owned the building that we wanted to rent and us, a new enterprise that needed that space. The next step is to have the professional services that social enterprise requires housed and readily available to small, fledgling, and maybe not so fledgling social enterprises. So I'm talking about marketing, HR, the accountancy, all those all those elements that every business needs. You have the governance as well. So you have that kind of core administration that a new social entrepreneur who is so full of passion for what they want to do, but they have to get all this stuff banked behind them, regardless of the fact that it's the most inspiring, social enterprise that we've ever seen. They have to get everything, they have to get all of this shored up behind them. And that is a huge gap. And sometimes we see social entrepreneurs who don't even realise that they're missing so much stuff, and to have that, it would be brilliant and an absolute dream come true to have that housed someplace, not nationally, but locally. So either within the partnership bodies or an organisation like Oakfield Trust that we can tap into, because we don't need recruitment expertise all the time. We might need it every 6 months, we might need it every 2 years or 3 years. We don't need accountancy advice every, constantly. So it's something like that. We don't need contracts to be reviewed. Are we on top of our contracts, our staff contracts? Has HR law changed since we, gave our last lot of contracts? So it's keeping on top of emerging legislation that pertains to HR, pertains to accounts, pertains to all those. For us, it's the child protection stuff. So it's all of that kind of background stuff that's so critically important to actually keeping the doors open, and that you're not going to be in panic when there's an audit coming up, because it's so vigorous. And we all want to be doing the right thing. It's the capacity within the organisations to do the right thing. Nobody sets out in social enterprise to kind of default the government, but by not knowing sometimes, you end up in a bit of bother or just stress, So it would be just a wonderful solution for emerging social enterprise to be able to tap in and say, right, what do I need in the background? And then I can go and I can pursue this really worthwhile initiative that I know is needed.
So Donal, what Una has said there is something that is tying in, I suppose, in essence to supply chain, but from a services point of view. And another thing that really matters, of course, is money. So how has Community Finance Ireland, how has it evolved in light of the evolving space that's there? And dare I say it, much higher interest rates as a result of what's happened with the ECB in the last year.
Yeah, and I suppose I meant to say the last time, we're a social enterprise too, even though we're a supplier to the sector, but that's the circular economy for you guys, thank you very much. But I mentioned the last time that it was put to us a number of years ago that there was nothing really in terms of a social finance product for the startups. And in the last week or so, we've launched in conjunction with Rethink Ireland. This is subsequent to some EU-funded research that we undertook, along with DCU and Rethink Ireland, supported by our social enterprise network. We launched a new product for the country called Hybrid Social Finance. Hybrid was mentioned by Aisha earlier on. And it essentially was to introduce to social enterprise that never experienced debt before, that never borrowed money before, a loan with stabilisers, so to speak. So the opportunity is there now on the Rethink website for anybody that wants to apply for this. And in essence, it provides loan finance from between €20,000 and €100,000 to organisations that are primarily first-time borrowers. And the way it would break down then is that they might ask for 100,000 top line, but they would only end up paying back 50,000 euro of it with interest. The other 50,000 would be provided in the form of a non-repayable loan. And aside from those financial supports, every applicant that's successful will also get 10,000 euro worth of business support for their first year of investment as well, to underpin the investment that's gone in here. So it really is a risk reduction exercise for those that are first-time borrowers. So that's what we've done at the lower end. I'm glad that the guys have mentioned about the credit union, because again, that's something that we've major experience for us there in the last number of weeks and months. Last year I spoke to the guys in the Leigh Credit Union in Mount Street about collaborating on co-lending on projects, because with the view to, well look, we buy our money from the banks, there's a concentration risk there in terms of when you're exposed to interest rate fluctuations. So we find ourselves in a situation now whereby interest rates have gone up by 345% in social finance in the last year. 345%. So that's not sustainable. So what we've done is we've done a partnership with the credit union movement at an all-in level, because we operate on a 32 county basis. And at this moment in time we have 22 credit unions engaged with me now, some very large scale ones whereby we would co-lend to organisations. Let's remember that the credit union movement have been very involved in communities and social enterprises, but in the majority of cases it's been through, £1,000 of a sponsorship here, or €5,000 of a sponsorship there, etc. But they've been reticent about getting involved in community lending per se, because there is a lot of risk or perceived risk associated with it, and it is a nuanced sector. There are a lot of things that you would need to spend a lot of time around it to kind of understand exactly what. So we've gone in and we've arranged with them that we will provide that business underwriting expertise. They can leverage our business expertise, and we will leverage their local intelligence and leverage their €20 billion worth of capital assets, that we can help get a portion of that out on the ground. Because again, the central bank obviously have regulatory restrictions on the amount of money they can actually lend into that space. And because those restrictions are there, it means it doesn't justify them employing business lenders to put the money out, because they're not going to get the return on it. So they can use our expertise, and we'll work on a collaborative basis to get that, to shift that money out into the space.
So if I could go to you next, Karen, on this, is that listening there to what Donal is describing, it sounds like the sector's evolving, the finance into the sector is evolving, that co-lending as well with the credit union. John also mentioned about swimming with or going with the flow of social enterprise, etc. You're in operation 15 years. Una mentioned she's in operation 21. What differentiates the longevity of your organisation, maybe with others who haven't quite made it to that same length of time, with the same passion?
I know. I think we've been very lucky in some ways. Like when I started out, I didn't know it was social enterprise. I didn't know it was social entrepreneur. It was actually Vincent and John who came along and explained that to me, and I said, yeah, that's what we did. But we were very lucky to get support and come up through the support systems that were there. The very first support for us was SERI, Social Entrepreneurs Ireland. We reached the highest level of funding, which we think Ireland, with the Ireland funds. We've had support from the Community Foundation, we've had support from Community Finance, and we have absolutely needed all of that. So that has to be there. But I do think part of it does come from your passion and drive, when you have a founder in place who will absolutely do everything to make sure that that organisation survives and make the sacrifices to make sure that it survives. And I do think that's the difference, where other people might give up and say, oh, this is not worth it. You're never ever going to give up on your organisation. Can I also, if I could though, also talk about the enterprise part of the enterprise? Yeah.
The way you run the actual business. How influential has that been in your sustainability?
Oh, absolutely huge. And we couldn't do it without it. So I always said, if you remember back in my presentation, we have no ambitions to become a state-funded charity. I'm not here with my hand out to say, come and fund us. We work really, really hard to stand on our own 2 feet and to generate our own traded income. And that actually has been key, because a lot of your grants will be restricted, but it's your core funding that becomes a bigger and bigger issue all the time. So for us, the shop and the traded income is what we would call unrestricted income. So that's going to pay your staff and your energy costs and your insurance. There's no grants out there, very few grants to do that. So you do need a level of unrestricted core income to run your organisation, and that can be generated through your traded income. And that's what probably has really helped us. It absolutely helped us survive COVID. We would have probably been at risk of sinking throughout COVID, because our traded income from our clinical services throughout COVID just fell off a cliff overnight. It went from here to zero. But what kept us going through COVID was the online store. Actually, that thrived through COVID. So we had an ability to generate our own traded income. Yes, we did need government support, and I'm very grateful for them, but it was never enough, as you say, there's never enough funding. But it's your ability to generate that traded income. And I would encourage you to look at ways of generating a sustainable source of traded income to fund those core costs that you're going to need to look at. You do need unrestricted funding for those things, and it is key.
Lorraine, can I put the last question to you, and I'll just go back and I'll take a look at Mentometer then. But the traded income, the unrestricted funding is the way Karen describes it. How could the path to being profitable? Because it's important, as a number of people have said, that profit is a good, positive connotation word. And it's not just a word, of course, it's the lifeblood of continuity in a lot of businesses, social or otherwise. But how could the path there to being profitable be at least as smooth as that of a traditional business?
Yeah, I think we need to look at it in that guise. So no more than an existing micro business setting up, or a small medium-sized business. There's certain government supports that they can tap into. It's a well-worn path, and even at that, you've loads of failures. Like, you've huge risk with traditional businesses as such, or commercial businesses, and you have a kind of an extra hoop when you're a social enterprise. And that's where you see the grants kick in, and you see the patient products that are needed. But I think the focus on traded income hasn't been where it needs to be. I think as a sector we need to be clearer about what the asks in the next policy need to be in around this, what exactly is needed, but what's needed at each stage. So if you're a startup and trying to trade, that's very different to Karen, where you sit at the moment. You're well established, and for you to boost your traded income, because the more you have in your traded income percentage, the more you're a master of your own destiny. You're not beholden to any grantor, or you don't have to try and be some sort of an arm of somebody else because you're providing a service that the state doesn't provide. So boosting your traded income for me needs to be broken out as to what's needed along each stage, because it does change, it's not all the same. And I think sometimes we talk about things as a sector or as for everyone, and that can get confused. And we need to be quite careful about what we're asking for in each stage, and as a sector, ask of that in the next policy, ask of that from government supports, so that that can be delivered in a clearer way.
So be very clear about what's being asked at the next stage of policy. Well, on that note, I'm just going to read out, there's been 3 more questions that's come in, and then John, I'll start with you, just your final wrap up for what your ask might be, and then we're going to put that out to the audience through Mentimeter as well. So, 3 questions. Are we building a model, and by the way, I'm just letting you know what the questions are, you don't need to directly address them, just give me a minute in each case. Are we building a model that means only staff of certain economic means can work in it in the long term? I think that might pick up there on what Karen was speaking about earlier. Can we get answers to some of the earlier questions? That's a question for me, right? Unfortunately, I don't have the time, but yes, certainly please go to everybody who you meet over lunch. And commercial enterprises, and still very much attractive and more sustainable because government benefit from them. I see a lot of lip service towards social enterprise because their impact isn't tangible. Okay, John, your final wrap-up minute.
Yeah, well, I disagree with that last one, because actually I think you get a lot more tangible impact from social enterprises. If you go to the Milton Friedman definition of the organisation to return shareholder value, that's not what happens in social enterprise. We return stakeholder value, which is basically, as Karen had said earlier, the kids and sensational kids. I think so my takeaway thing, I have 2. So the main one really is it's up to us to see how we see ourselves. I think we've got to see ourselves in a bigger and more challenging role than maybe we do. We're not just a sector. We're not a little ecosystem. Actually, we're providing a genuine alternative, and we need to see ourselves in that role and build on that. And probably coalesce, if I might disagree with Siobhan from earlier about the echo chamber, I actually don't think we need enough to coalesce, to really collaborate, to really do active things to make this happen. I think we really need to become much more militant is probably too strong a word, but you know what I mean. A much more mobilised sector than we currently are. And just one takeaway, an idea that occurred to me when Karen was talking about, the people like herself and their exit strategies. We talk a lot about social procurement, but there's one thing that the state does a lot of, which is the placement on state boards. And shouldn't there be a quota for state boards, that people who have worked in the social enterprise sector, who have a huge amount of talent and experience, that there should be a certain amount kept for people like Karen on state boards? Thanks.
Okay, Lorraine?
I think we need to keep evolving the conversation. It's like Karen bringing up exit strategies today, or that scaling of a business, or the challenges that she's facing. So we need to move with this, and we need to be really clear on what the asks are so that government can respond. So the clearer we are, the easier it is for government to say yes or no, and for us then to challenge the response that we're getting.
Okay, Richard?
Yeah, I have a lot of takeaways from today's session. I think the two presentations we had earlier really kind of just showed the impact of social enterprise, but they also touched on how difficult it can be to measure the impact, and it's an area that's going to be covered in the new policy, possibly even trying to help social enterprises to measure their own impact, make it easier for them. But as we heard, it's definitely no easy thing to do, but plenty of food for thought from those two presentations.
Okay, Donal?
I have a very clear ask, and that is if there's anybody here today who needs electrical appliance recycled, please give me a call.
Anything with a plug or a battery?
Anything with a plug or a battery. And I would say, buy from your social enterprises. You know, there's no point in us talking about social enterprises if we're not buying and using the services of social enterprise. So for anybody who needs a motivational day for staff, we create do that. You know, so there's so many social enterprises in each of the counties, but we need to start promoting them, and we need to start buying services from them.
Okay, yeah. Donal?
Thanks. Two major takeaways. I suppose the first one is for the benefit of others and people looking for exit strategies out of this space. One of the problems that I didn't touch on earlier on are things that the sector should be developing is capacity building for the sector. There's nothing really we're talking about tangible in terms of capacity building for the sector, and I think it needs to be led by practitioners.
Social enterprise practitioners?
Yes, people who walk the walk,
yeah.
Sponsored by the government, because I think in the long term it will save an awful lot of hassle and cost. Now, I'm not pointing fingers at anyone in particular, but I can think of some people that would be better than others in terms of there's a panel of very successful social entrepreneurs out there that could do that sort of stuff. So that was it. The other takeaway is the one that I was thinking of myself from a selfish perspective was one of the litmus tests for social enterprise is, can you handle debt? If you ever needed to. Maybe not today, but if you were to go away from today thinking about, if at some point during this year we did actually have to take on debt, would we be able to service it from our earned income? Yes? Good? No? What are the steps that we need to take that if we ever find ourselves in that position, that we would be there?
Okay. And finally, Karen.
Yeah, so just for any social entrepreneurs out there starting out, is that yes, there are challenges in the sector, but don't be disheartened. I think there is, I would say to you, never ever give up, and I think you probably naturally won't do that anyway. So yes, there are challenges, yes, it is hard, but please keep going, because no other job is going to move you to tears because of the impact that you're making. And that in itself is why you do it. So always remember your why and never give up.
Okay, inspiring words indeed. So the formal part of today is finished, and before we go to lunch though, we do want to ask you just three questions. I'm going to get on to the ask particularly, but this is one that if I could actually just pick up on John's point when he said about coalescing more. So we just want to quickly ask you three questions. This is one. So what type of events would social entrepreneurs like to see? Is it days like today, or is it different? So I just want to give a moment to this first, and menti.com, the code up here is 15997982. So I see we have two answers here, and I just want to gather a few more of these before then I go on, and my next question is going to be picking up on Lorraine's question, which is what is the ask for Richard, basically. So, okay, I can see we have 6 answers now. So an event where the CEOs of all support bodies are available for discussion and questions. Workshops with successful social entrepreneurs, that's picking up there Donal's point. Forums for scaling social enterprises, I'd say Karen will involuntarily not. Networking events, more case studies, learn a lot. Ploughing championship style for social enterprises. Well, I'm from Cork, so that's great. Networking and case study testimonial events, well-being support for social enterprise. Maybe again picking up on John's point about taking care of people at the front line. More networking events that are similar, practitioner-led events, more localised events like this. Okay, right, so we've had 10 people who have submitted those, and there's 12 answers. And again, if there's any more to come in after that, please do let Gareth know. But this is the big one, is what is your ask of policymakers? And this is super important. What is your ask of policymakers? Because of course, Richard and his team went around the country looking for this, and we really want to make sure that we have taken the pulse from everybody. So what is your ask of policymakers? Of anything you've heard today, or indeed anything that you've heard outside of today, anything that hasn't been discussed today. What is your ask of policy makers? Okay. I'm just going to give this a couple of moments. And obviously, Richard, I'm not going to ask you to comment on this, but I certainly will be sending it out. Okay, so responsible employment schemes, look again at social impact bonds, direct long-term funding that does not break us to get, okay? Core continuing funding to fund the gap, long-term funding, more involvement, more funding, advertise social enterprise better as a concept so that people know the difference between it and charity. It'll be interesting to see what happens in that tomorrow as well when that date is out. Join the many support bodies together and have one recognisable place to go support. Perhaps that one-stop shop, for example, Una, you were mentioning, believe in the process. I think, well, certainly Joyce, Karen and Una have told us an awful lot about that today. Staff funding, introduce a social value act, make it mandatory for all purchases to include social impact, possibly pick up there in the procurement area there, we were talking about with Siobhan. More multi-annual core funding, points about the Karen made. Extra funding and resources for local development companies to support local social enterprises. Many organisations, social enterprises cannot access funding for staff, UBU funding CSB, as they don't tick the boxes, as there are over too many government departments. Can we break down this barrier? Work with third levels to develop modules in social enterprise, again building on the TY level and above. Ministerial title including social enterprise. More expertise making decisions. Do you not already know what we need? Interesting, okay. And it is that what we think we know is what stops us from learning, is what I always think when it comes to something like that. One, OGP are open to using community assets for the whole community to lift the need to be charged and be a social enterprise. Stop forcing social enterprises to be a CLG. Okay, so we have 17 people here that have provided 23 answers, and so the last one you'll see there, what's on it, it's the answers to those questions are going to be appearing there on screen. It's simply to garner feedback on today. So on that note, I want to sincerely thank each of our panellists, to John, to Lorraine, to Una, to Donal, to Richard, and also to Karen. I have 12 names that I've had to remember very, very carefully and delicately today. So will you put your hands together, please, for our job today is to thank everybody who has been involved in this, to the venue here at Quay, to Gareth who has been working directly and giving me all of my direction as regards what to do today, to Aileen and to everybody at Oakfield to giving us this opportunity to be here, and of course most of all to each and every single one of you who've been here, asked your questions, interacted, been here with us and been part of the conversation. Like I mentioned, I'll be doing a summary and I have some job to put all of that into 10 minutes. That's the max you can do a LinkedIn Live video on. I'll be doing that and I'll tag everybody who's been speaking, so please feel free to check that out later on, and I'll send that to Gareth also as an output of today. And also, of course, lunch is just out here, so we have the space for another hour. Take the time to have a chat, talk about these, and let's see what we can make happen. Thank you, everyone.